this year started another shop because we always hear in this space, right? You can't do this on Etsy and it's saturated and you can't get, 100 sales or whatever, in a short amount of time. And so earlier this year in 2024, I'm like, let's just kind of test that theory.
On today's episode of the TDSM podcast, we have a super inspirational and guest, Mandy. Mandy is the host of the Simply POD with Mandy YouTube channel, and she has been helping Etsy sellers create online businesses in the print-on-demand space for a few years now. She has managed to quit her corporate HR 9-to-5 job and really do this full time, and she's been sharing that journey on YouTube for free. And this is a really important episode because she's going to show us how even in 2024 and beyond 2025, you can crack the code in the Etsy print-on-demand space. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, and welcome, Mandy, to the TDSM podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I know we've been trying to do this for a while, and now we're finally here. So that's good. I'm so happy to have you, and I'm so happy for our audience to hear your whole story. You have a super inspirational story. And yeah, I just want to let you take the floor here and just kind of tell us, what were you doing before, and how did you get into this whole Etsy business?
So my entire background, my career, my college, all of that good stuff was human resources. That was who I was. That was my identity for a long time. But I also loved really having side hustles. So I've done everything from, having a cupcake business for a few years to Amazon KDP, and started a handmade business on Etsy in 2017 and did that for a very long time. And then fast forward through the pandemic and all of that, I ended up doing pretty well with my handmade business. And just from being burnt out, working lots of hours and lots of stresses, a lot of people did during the pandemic, I decided to go full time with my handmade business. And that was great for a while, but kind of always had that entrepreneurial itch that we all get if you're in the entrepreneurial space. You know that feeling. And so I knew that I wanted to, have a different creative outlet that wasn't necessarily what I was working on all day. So I had this wild idea from, watching TikToks and, all of those deep dives. I was going to make some merch for that business and have it, I'm in the Midwest. And so have an outdoorsy nature theme that went along with that. That would be great. So then I'm like, I'm going to get a heat press. I'm going to do, all the things right on top of what I was already doing. And that did not go well. That was not my jam. I am not cut out to do all of this production during the day and then, stand over a heat press to make some shirts, which is probably not a great idea from the get-go, but it was fun while it lasted. So then that's when I really discovered print on demand and really literally became obsessed with it. Like this whole notion of being able to create as much as you want, basically, which is the part that I love, and then put it on, products that serve an audience and that people buy with your designs on it. Like I just thought that was the coolest thing. So I started doing that for a while, about a year after I was, doing my handmade business full time. Did that for a while and, started seeing all of these videos of people really making it huge in the print on demand space. I was dabbling at that point. And again, it was really creating stuff that I was enjoying and, not necessarily what the market was looking for. It was just more so a creative outlet. But then I saw, a lot of that inspiration out there and thought these people are making a killing, on Etsy and they're doing it in pretty short order. And I'm like, I could do that. Right. Because it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. I take those things as definitely like a challenge when I see other people doing things that I think would be really fun and inspiring to do. I just decided kind of in that moment, because I could do all of this on the side, and that's what I loved about print on demand too. Like I wasn't having to fulfill anything. I could run my other business, my other, quote, 9-to-5, which was still, my business, but that was my full-time business. This is something I could do on the side and not have to have inventory, not have to have production, not have to do any of those other things that are really labor and, resource intensive. So like, I'm going to grow this and I'm going to see what happens and I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do the research that I know that needs to go into it. I'm going to do, all of the market. I'm going to get better at designing and I'm just going to see what the heck happens. And so I, started that original Etsy print on demand shop in kind of tail end of May 2022, I think. Ran up that hill as fast as I could, started, getting a volume of listings out there, had Etsy ads going, just everything I could to get some traction, get some data to go along with it, and then continue to just iterate and improve along the way. And so I ended up hitting the 6-figure mark with that shop in right around 10 months. And so then from there it was like, wow, this is like a whole thing. Like this is possible. And so I was posting at that point. I was getting a lot of questions of how do you do that? How do you design things? How do you get it onto your product? Just a lot of those just very technical questions of, how things work as I was kind of sharing, this journey and how it was going. And so that's, eventually what led me to being able to share things like that, help teach others and really show others, that it's possible to do that. And there are ways to do that and strategies to do that. And so since then I still have that shop. It's multiple 6 figures at this point now. I've started another shop that I use specifically for teaching on my channel. And even with that one, still got a low conversion because it's shared publicly, obviously. But even that one, being able to grow that and, show some of the repeatable processes. And then this year started another shop because we always hear in this space, right? You can't do this on Etsy and it's saturated and you can't get, 100 sales or whatever, in a short amount of time. And so earlier this year in 2024, let's just kind of test that theory. I work with a lot of people who are just starting shops. A lot of people that follow me are just starting shops. And so it's like, let's see what we can do with this. And, in fairly short order, got to, the 100 sales, the 200 sales, and just continue, to see how that progresses as well.
That shop you said you just started in 2024?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, the very tail end of February. And within about a week, a few days, had the first sale. And again, kind of repeated the same steps that I'm used to using and implementing. And again, just, talking about and, seeing if it's possible. And I think that's what helps people and kind of shows people and motivates people that just because you hear that, it didn't work for somebody else, doesn't mean it's not going to work for you or that it's not possible. One person's journey is one person's journey. And so, I think that's one of the things that I try to share with people is you can do whatever you want to do, right? There's the only person, the only thing stopping you is you, right? And, mindset and, sometimes skill set, growing those, but anything is possible, right? We get one life. You want to do something. That's what I tell you. You want to do something, you go do it. You figure out a way to do it. This is an Etsy shop, right? For me, especially the brand new one, it's a side thing. I don't get a ton of time to spend a whole lot of time, especially with this brand new shop. And it was still possible. So it's, I think it's a good reminder that there's still a lot of things out there that you can do.
When you first got into all this because you didn't have a design background, so at what point did you feel like your designs actually started getting good, or did you think that they were good from the beginning?
I think we all think we make good stuff in the beginning, right? I think we all have kind of that self-delusion of this is great. People are going to buy this, And then I think what was important was, you start that process, and I'm a big person in just like experiment, test, just that iteration process of continuing to do it. And over time, the more you do that, again, I'm all about looking at kind of data and data doesn't lie, right? That whole concept of data doesn't lie. So I'm looking at it, it's like, okay, some stuff would get a lot of, views and favorites. I'm like, okay, that's that's good, right? That's data, that's information that I can use. So I'm like, I'm going to create more of those. And then I would go look, out on Etsy at some of, what other shops were selling. And I was looking at what are some of the best sellers? What are some of the, the popular nows that people seem to really like, and collectively, what's different about theirs? Why is it selling? Are they using, I design on a lot of apparel. So are they using specific colors? Are they using specific fonts or placement? Is it for specific niches or customer identities? Is it, personalized or not? And the more I did that, the more I could learn from that and really look for those clues of what's working, what are customers actually buying, right? What does the market actually want versus, little old me thinking, I'm making the greatest little, design over here. And what I would want, what does the market actually want? And so the more I did that, the more I could infuse that information into my designs to make myself better because I had never designed on apparel before. I had never designed on a mug before. I have zero background in graphic design. I like the creative process. I like creating things. Some of my original print on demand stuff was more like patterns and like artwork that I was creating, but to create something that is not for me, not for, my mom buying, a blanket with a pattern on it, but actually what, the broader market actually wants is different. And I think there's, a different approach, obviously, that goes with that. So,
how many listings did you feel like you made before it was like, oh, you see the traction of sales coming out? Like when you first started, how long was it from, just making stuff to like, oh, I actually see the momentum and my designs are getting better? Like how many months would you say?
I started because of the timing. I knew going in, this was, again, when I first started, it was kind of the tail end of May, I think. And I knew just from being in e-commerce, being on Etsy, that going into summer months was going to be slow. So I wasn't even designing necessarily for like summer stuff. I'm, like, I don't care that it's slow. I knew that kind of my eye was on Q4 and really just ramping up on pretty much as many listings as I could like work on, again, outside of other stuff. So I ended up creating about, it was right around 700 listings in about 5 months or so. And I started to see some traction, I'd say probably 3 or 4 months in. And again, remember those early designs aren't good. And I think that's, kind of the takeaway is, if you're just creating volume for the sake of volume, it's one of my favorite questions, actually, because I get asked it all the time. Like, how many listings do I have to make before I start getting sales? Or, do I need to have 3 shops? It's the volume doesn't necessarily matter. But for me, what the volume is there for is to improve and to get data. If you're just, cranking through without doing any sort of reflection along the way and creating, 1,000 or 2,000 listings, but you're not actually looking back as you go, like along the way to see, is any of it actually getting traction? Is any of it actually getting seen? Is any of it actually getting favorites? Is anybody actually liking this? You've spent a whole lot of time creating a whole lot of things that probably aren't going to sell because you haven't really paid attention along the way. For me, the volume is more about creating a bunch of batches and then reflecting back on those as I go. Create more batches based on what I see, reflect as I go. And just kind of having that cycle of looking at what I'm creating, making a lot of it because there is certainly something to be said for the more that's out there, the more data you see, the more chances you have to start showing up in search results, especially as, a newer shop. But then you have to make sure you get to the point of actually looking to see, is any of this working? Because if you just keep repeating the same things that aren't working, it's the definition of insanity, right? You're not actually going to see results. You can do the volume. You just have to make sure that you go back and close the loop of, is any of it actually working? And if it's not, you have to have, kind of that conversation with yourself of, okay, maybe my shop is getting views because I've got volume out there, right? But if I'm not seeing any favorites, I'm not seeing any sales, that probably means that I might need to, I'm either targeting the wrong customer or my designs probably aren't that great. And I saw that too early on. Like I said, we all have our day one, myself included. Everyone, especially in print on demand who started this, they all have their day one. And it can take a while to learn along the way, but it's that learning and that iteration and that going back and kind of seeing what's working and what's not, and then being willing to pivot along the way and adapt. Like the stuff that sells for me now, even, 2 years later, is not necessarily the stuff that I started out with and originally started creating, like in terms of niches and, target customers, because it's more of a general store. So there are a variety of different, people that I'm serving, but the stuff that predominantly sells now is not at all what I started with. And I continue to get, sales and things like that now and traction, and almost have just a couple of pockets that I really sell the highest volume in because of that learning over time. And then the SEO algorithm, as a result, you see what's working. You start to get those sales and reviews. You start to get that ranking and that sales velocity on Etsy. Etsy sees that. They send more people like that into the searches where your listings are showing up. They start to show your listings more to those customers. So I think there's that push and pull and give and take of, we like to blame Etsy's algorithm when stuff isn't working, but we also have to recognize that there's an underlying element there that's really smart. Etsy's out there to make money just like the rest of us. So, sellers aren't selling, Etsy's not making money either.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, we may not always love it. And certainly, yes, there are things, in the algorithm we don't always understand. But at the end of the day, once the algorithm really understands when a shop is doing well, when it's really identified what they're selling, who they're selling it to, and which customers are converting for that shop, that algorithm is smart enough to know how to leverage that. And I think stores that stick with it and really kind of start to hone in and refine their strategies once they kind of start to see that. And it can take a while to figure that out. I'm 2 years in and, still learning and making adjustments here and there. But the more you can pay attention to that, the more you can really leverage and get the most out of that algorithm and really what it's intended to do.
That makes sense. So for someone like just starting out or whatever, like you're talking about like likes and favorites or whatever. So like you just launched your store, you have 100 listings. After how long of maybe just getting likes and favorites and no sales would you say, ooh, maybe there's a problem? Or first, like how many listings? They've tested X amount of listings and this X Y amount of time. What would you say is that's a no? That means it's a no. Something's wrong with the product or the designs. Maybe like a month, like you have 100 listings and it's been 2 months, maybe.
It can really vary, but especially, so here's the thing, like I turn on ads to get data, right? Not to be profitable in the beginning, but to get data faster and to start getting more views and visits so that I can see more of that faster. You can do it organically. You can send more traffic through social media, but if you're just doing organically, it will just naturally take longer to have enough data to really see it. So if someone's not turning on, ads and they're doing it strictly organically, I say give it a little bit longer, but also don't necessarily focus on the time or the volume. You just keep going through that cycle of, if you got 100 listings up and that took you about a month, okay, look at the last 30 days of data in your shop and see, are you starting to see any traction? Are you starting to see favorites somewhere? If you're not seeing like any views or any favorites or any clicks, and you've got 100 listings and it's been about a month, then I would explore maybe a different niche or a different target customer or try a different design and then do your next batch of 50 to 100 listings and then go back and start looking. So just make it that iterative process of don't necessarily wait per se. It's, it's more of just a cycle versus get to a point, wait, look back and see, get to another point, wait, look back and see. It's keep looking at it and just kind of keep that cycle moving. And the more you can do that and the more you can keep adjusting along the way, that's where I think you start to see more traction. Because even in the brand new shop that I started in 2024, I originally had one idea. Like, I'm going to do this. It was going to be more kind of outdoorsy, I would say, and, kind of an aesthetic. And I had probably, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 listings. And I tend to be a little impatient. So I'm like, 20, 30 listings. We'll see how this goes. And, again, I'm not working on that shop full time by any stretch of the imagination. This was just as I had time to kind of get some listings in here and there on top of my other shops and all of my other handmade business, which I still do. So I'm like, I'm just going to get a few in and see what happens. Have the ads on, and get some initial data. And then it probably, it took me a little bit to come back to it. And then I was just not seeing necessarily what I thought I wanted to see. So I'm like, I'm going to try, I was starting to see some trends, again, just out of the marketplace, using my own knowledge of, just researching, seeing what's out there and selling. So I had kind of one aesthetic going originally with some listings, and I did the other half kind of in this other aesthetic. And that's the one that started like getting traction faster. So the other thing too is don't necessarily feel like, you have a plan in mind. It's great to have an initial plan, but also don't necessarily box yourself in and feel like you're stuck and have to stay there if you're not seeing the outcome that you want to see, and so it's that willingness to not just say, well, could have easily started with one, let that run for a while, maybe gotten some sales because some of those have sold, just not to the volume that I wanted to see that the others did. But if I had just started with, the one and not made any changes and not experimented with anything else, not experimented along the way, I might not have known that. And I may just have become, another statistic of, well, see, didn't work, guys,
Yeah, that makes sense. I've never actually heard anyone explain it like that, because I'm very much, like in the handmade space, it's very handmade sellers and POD sellers have two sets of different problems. But
We do.
yeah, like for handmade, it's all about cohesive. Be a cohesive brand. The algorithm wants you to be a cohesive brand, but you just said no. You can not that you're not making beautiful listings. It's just you could technically, let the data tell you what direction that aesthetic, that end aesthetic or whatever it's going to go in or whatever. But that's interesting. Can you share the aesthetic, or I understand if it's like you don't share the tech?
With the new one, it's more of kind of a Y2K, I would say. So it's like, one aesthetic was very much more kind of crunchy, outdoorsy, and, even just trying different product types too was interesting. And like I said, this other one, it's not that I necessarily changed the whole branding of the shop aesthetic entirely, but I did kind of pivot a little bit in terms of how I presented it. And like I said, they both technically work. Arguably, I probably have a couple of different, not competing, but different audiences in there. But, again, they're both selling. I would say what I've done though is the proportion of my listings. And again, this shop doesn't even have that many listings. I mean, I think it's less than 200 because again, I don't have huge amounts of time to spend on it like I do on other things and did in the beginning of building my very first main shop. But yeah, it's been interesting. And that's also what I want to do with it, is be able to experiment, right? My main print-on-demand shop is definitely much more general. And so, all 20 sections are different and have some different audiences. I would say there's where I bring in cohesion, and I think of, like you said, branding in a couple different ways, is more so an aesthetic. So if you think of like Y2K or cottagecore or, boho or whatever, retro, whatever it might be, I think of those as aesthetics. And I also think there's a way to do that. So, what I've told people is, if they're wanting to experiment in a shop and have more general and have maybe several different niches that they're experimenting with, because they don't necessarily know in the beginning what's going to get the most traction, I'll say at least, use a similar color palette. Or think of your aesthetic, like your mock-ups. Like, how
Mm.
are you presenting it? How are you presenting your designs and niches in a cohesive way within your shop? Because then at least that's one less thing to kind of think about and try to think about a million different directions that you could go. And I'm like, then think about, okay, if you're wanting to design for, these are broad obviously, but like teachers and several different professions within there, or nurses or medical staff and several different professions within there. That's great and fine. Experiment with that, but think about where you can build in some cohesion along the way so that you can at least have one level of that there.
That makes sense. It's so cool talking to people and like hearing the way that your whole minds, like everyone's mind works, because, we all kind of have like the same issues. And then, we are using slightly different word. Like you just described like your brand aesthetic, and I say your brand vibe, you actually just changed my perspective on something, because I always say, create a brand vibe, which in your case is the brand aesthetic. And I always give the example of like Nike versus like Victoria's Secret. Like you walk into one store and you walk into another. And now I'm realizing that I'm probably confusing people, because you just said Y2K, boho, and what was like another one?
Cottagecore, retro.
Where technically all three of those could be in the same store. But now I'm thinking in my own YouTube videos, they're probably thinking that I'm saying all three of those need to be separate stores, when really like those three kind of go together. What I'm saying is don't do boho and then emo in the same store. You know what I mean? Like that's the point I'm trying to make. But now I probably am confusing people. So, or at least for the print on demand people that watch me, but I know I'm mostly like handmade or whatever. But yeah, it's just really, I get so much value out of these calls. So just thank you on that. But that's really, really interesting. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't even know how you have time to do everything that you're doing on top of YouTube and everything. So at what point did you start your YouTube channel?
I started that, oh my gosh, it's been over a year now. That's kind of crazy to believe. But yeah, it was kind of, I think, February last year in 2023. And that was so actually, I first started on TikTok, which for me, looking back, I'm almost 40, so I'm aging myself clearly, but it's like, I look back and I'm like, girl, how did you land on TikTok? And I was super late to the TikTok game too, but I decided it would be this great idea, as I was designing things, again, very early on in my print on demand, it was patterns. So I was creating those and then sharing those on TikTok, because there was a period of time where like, it was almost like, not quite ASMR, but it was like a whole thing to like watch people just like design and draw basically in a Procreate app and make patterns and things like that. So I did that for a while, and then that, evolved into, holy cow, I can put these on products. So my very, very first, like I said, step into print on demand was epic failure, right? Because the only people buying those products were my mom. Thanks, Mom. And like, I think they're great. I don't have one like on me in my room, but I have like, little can, koozie things like that with my patterns and designs. But I started there and then have evolved. But like I said, that it didn't have an audience, right? And I think that's where a lot of people make the misstep when they start, is they don't know who they're designing for. And you may not know that right away, but at least have something in mind. Even if you think about your own, like we all have an identity, right? We are all, more than one thing. Like I'm a mom, I was in HR, I was, had a profession, people have pets, people have kids, things like that. Having identities and passions that you can tap into, that I think is where people see more of the magic happening, because that's when you can get customers to really say, I want that. So that was the turning point. And like I said, then I started to share more of that on, my TikToks at the time, when I started to kind of make that transition into doing more print on demand, selling on Etsy, doing all those different things. And then it became, well, show me more. Like, how do you do this? Like, I only have like, at the time it was, 30 to 60 second videos. I think you can do like 20 minutes now on TikTok, which is just crazy. Who goes to TikTok for a 20-minute video? We all know we're there to just doom scroll, right? For our short attention spans. But it was like, okay, so I need a longer form, content for this. So then that's why I started to make the shift over to YouTube, to be able to share more of that and like go a little more in depth to put the pieces together. Because I think that's the other thing too is, and I'm guilty. When I started this, I saw probably a 20-second video that said, make 100K with, a t-shirt kind of a thing, but that's such a small little piece of the puzzle, right? There are so many different layers and elements that go into it to really help make you more successful in just about anything in life, right? You can't really sum up a lot of things in, just 10 to 15 second snippets.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's how the YouTube was born. So you're still posting on TikTok or no more?
I tried to do both for a while, but man, it's hard. My brain, I thought it was going to be hard going from short form to long form. For me, especially I think it's more so to do with the fact that I was in HR for so long. So I used to do learning and talent development. So a lot of trainings, building trainings, learning how people learn best, and then, training them as it related to, job stuff and work stuff. But I actually found, so it was easier for me to go from short form to long form, because then I could explain things more. And I felt like I was like actually adding more value to the conversation and helping someone learn something new. And so then trying to do both and go from that long form to something really short was like, whew, that's kind of hard. So
Yeah.
and it's hard, with doing a million things. I do still have my handmade business. And like you said, the challenges between doing production and fulfillment yourself, like if you've never done that, it's a whole different thing. Like it's a whole different ball of wax and a whole different set of, problems and struggles, right?
Yeah.
That's what I love about print on demand is I call it freedom from fulfillment. And so sometimes I'll have people, that I've had conversations with of, but I don't have control with print on demand. And I'm like, yeah, being a handmade person myself, I get it. There's an element of having to, let go of not having certain parts of the process that you can control. But also with that, think about the scaling possibilities. I mean, there's been times where I had, and I know plenty of people have way more orders than this in a day, but there was a holiday, a day around the holidays where I had over 90 orders coming from print on demand for fulfillment. And, if you stop and think about that, like if you're running a handmade business on your own, which my husband helps me with some stuff now, but for the most part, I do all the production myself. That's very different fulfilling 91 things versus print on demand. You might need to review, but you're basically hitting submit. It becomes someone else's problem, right?
Exactly.
It's so different, which means the scaling capabilities are so different. With handmade, I've always wanted to keep it very small. I would never actually starting this again as a very small side hustle in 2017 is how my handmade business started. And it's natural skincare. So, I'm making and producing a lot of things. I never in my wildest dreams thought that I'd ever take it to what I did, let alone go full time with it for a period of time and, walk away from my career and be allowed to walk away from my career because I could. It was never intended to be that way. But it was also, never intended to scale really big. Like I know you worked, hired staff and things like that. I also spent many years supervising people. And when I went full time with a business, I'm like, I'm not ready to, I'm kind of enjoying this whole like me, myself, and I at home, being my own boss, not having to be responsible for anybody else. And so, the point is there's only so far in a handmade business that you can do that. You can only scale so far. There's been times where I've reined in some of my handmade stuff from like, I do wholesale, but I stopped seeking out additional wholesale relationships. And I've said no several times of, large retailers wanting to bring in product because I know that I'd be responsible for production or I'd have to hire someone to do it. So if you're doing everything yourself, it's capped to a point. If you're having to do all of that production and fulfillment yourself, and like I said, for me personally, no desire to start adding staff and additional things like that. Whereas with print on demand, have scaled to multiple six figures. I can run as many shops as my heart really desires, which probably at the moment is a few too many as it is. But that you can scale it so differently because as many listings as you want to create,
Mm.
many different products as you want to create, whether it's on Etsy or Shopify, take it wherever you want, do whatever you want with it, grow it into, a big brand if you'd like to, but you can scale that and you can fulfill and you can expand that in ways that you can't always do, at least not as easily in the handmade space, because you don't have to worry about cost of inventory and cost of fulfillment and all those things. There's certainly, elements that you still have to worry about with print on demand and you lose control. And, certainly sometimes you have to follow up on quality if there's an issue, but it's different.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it comes down to what people want to do. Like, I can't tell someone that handmade is better or print on demand is better. That's a choice that, I think is what's beautiful, right? Is you can choose. You can do both if you want to. I have sellers that I've worked with that like to do certain products that they make themselves, and they have certain products, sometimes even in the same shop, that they outsource, that they do print on demand for. And that's, it's such a cool thing. And there's the capability to do that. And it's a great choice to be able to make. But
yeah, no, that's awesome. With your shop specifically, you said you talked about running ads. Had you always run ads from the beginning?
Yeah, I actually have, because I used to run them. I still run them a fair amount, so I still have my Etsy handmade. It's very small. I don't really update or do much of anything, but it still gets sales. And I still have ads on just a few products in there because those ads they're still profitable and they convert really well. So again, I think just knowing that had been my experience with it and kind of what I knew could work to get those additional views and data, that's how I've always started it. And like I said, for most people, myself included, when you first start ads in the beginning, they're not profitable. And as I tell people, that's not the intent. If you're a brand new shop, zero experience, they won't be. Right. The odds of them being profitable, like right away in the beginning, are low. Number one, your listings, like we talked about, probably aren't going to be that great to begin with. And number two, the algorithm is still learning like who your shop is, like what you sell, who your audience is, looking at your keywords, like all those things. And that takes a little bit of time. But like I said, what you get from that is that increase of Etsy's testing it and Etsy's firing off your listings, all over the place to see what converts. And the benefit of that is you get to see, the output of that, right? You get to see what is or isn't working. And as I tell people with ads, I tend to run ads probably a little bit longer than a lot of people do just because I like to see the data. So like I said, they only might be like a 1.5 or 2 ROAS. I might let it roll a bit longer just to kind of see if that changes, because a couple of sales, if it just starts converting, can really change that. But over time, I tell people, I'm like, if you're a brand new shop and you're running ads from the beginning and you've got a decent volume of listings, let's say even just 100, and you're going like 45, 60 days and you're not seeing like any conversion whatsoever, and you're just not seeing a great performance, doesn't mean you're necessarily profitable for a ROAS. But if you're not seeing any actual conversion and sales from that, I always tell people, turn them off, start looking at your data that you did get, and start doing some additional experimenting. And then turn your ads on with those new set of listings. Get a fresh batch out, let it go. You don't have to get rid of those listings because sometimes they're still fine. I mean, I've had a listing sell like a year later. Sometimes it happens, but the point is, something, the magic isn't happening yet. And in that amount of time, you should see something happening. And if you're not, turn off the ads. Don't just keep spending money because then it's turning into a money pit.
Yeah.
And try something else. Just start experimenting. Doesn't mean that you fail. Doesn't mean that your shop's not going to get sales. Doesn't mean that you need to start a brand new shop and do that whole thing. No, just focus on, keep your eyes on the road, keep moving forward, learn from what you did, go back to the market, revisit what's selling, revisit your niches. Are they in demand? Are there other sellers who are making money in that niche, even just broadly, and then start experimenting from there and start getting a new set of data to work on. And for some people, that can take, as I tell people, one journey is one journey. One shop might see that magic happen. They might land on that profitable niche and have some decent designs and see some good return on their ads early on. Other shops might not. And sometimes it might take a couple, a couple iterations, a couple rotations, some reflection to really land on it. But you can get there. And I do think, if people are paying attention, if they're watching the data, if they're actually learning from what they're doing, I think that's such a big piece of this, is not just taking action and making listings for the sake of it, but actually learning along the way and improving along the way. That I think is the important piece. Because so often people hear, they'll mistake, like I said earlier, they'll mistake volume of listings. I'm gonna make 1,000 listings. I've had people get to 1,000 listings in like a month. I'm like, but did you learn anything along the way?
It's like if you just go to the gym, but did you work out?
Right.
Did you actually challenge yourself, or did you just?
I went to the gym once and I stayed at the gym for like 6 hours.
Yeah,
but then I didn't go again. So it's like there's a difference there, right? So I always tell people, like, pace yourself. If you've got the time, like if you're doing this full time and you have the time and ability to get a ton of listings up, that's great. But you need to be able to reflect and analyze and reassess along the way, especially if you're not seeing results. And like I said, people say, well, then how do I know it's, wrong? Go look at the market. Go look in, it doesn't even have to be specifically your niche, but go look at, some of the big pockets. Go look at like women's shirts or, gift for mom. Those are really big. I don't expect anyone to like break into those right out of the gate. But it'll also tell you like where people have risen up in competition, like what is actually selling. What are the designs and styles? What's trending? Doesn't mean you need to copy those, but you need to understand and see visually those elements of what's working. Etsy is so visual, right? And when people are shopping online, that's a visual activity, right? We're not walking into a shop, looking at it and touching it and smelling, the shop around us. It's like you said, it's not Victoria's Secret. You're not going to have like a whole experience. You get, especially on Etsy, you get one shot sometimes in the search results to make a first impression. And if your listings aren't doing it, that means that you need to learn and go look at shops where listings are converting, where they are getting those customers, and look at what you're creating versus what they're creating. Could you make improvements to your mock-ups? Look at your designs. What's different about theirs? Start digging into it before you start saying it's just not working. Can't possibly be me. Can't possibly be me. It's just not working.
Yeah, Mandy, that was like, you seriously just gave us a wealth of information. I literally, like, you answered all of my questions and I didn't even have to ask them. But seriously, like, you just gave us so much, and you have such a different way of teaching from it's more than just data decisions, but like intentionally going back and checking and really following the KPIs and following those key signs. And the way that you teach is very clear. Like, you're making it very clear on what, like, I'm understanding, even if I don't even do print on demand. So that's good, right? So like, you have a very clear approach to how to scale this thing from the very earliest of stages. So I think that's really powerful. And I don't know, you're very good at teaching and very thorough. So I think that a lot of people are going to get value from this episode. But yeah, a little bit side note here, a little bit off of Etsy, but as you know, with this podcast or whatever, it's all about, what are some of the biggest things you've had to overcome in business, and what are we never going to stop striving for until death stop us? So yeah, what is some things that you had to overcome in this journey that were difficult for you?
The biggest part of it is just the mindset, right? Number one, it's if you're striving for excellence, the success will come. So it's always about doing the best you can with what you have at any given moment. And that will evolve and that will get better over time. but focusing on that versus just focusing on this outcome. I want a certain number of sales, or I want a certain number, of revenue. That's important, right? Outcomes are important, but often if we just focus on that versus what we are doing and kind of having a path in front of us and just knowing that we're going to do everything we can to do the best that we can with the information that we have and focus on that excellence. I think that's the biggest part of it, because, we can set ourselves up for failure. Like if I had said, I want to hit, 5,000 sales and I didn't, do that, that's how we can set ourselves up for failure, and disappointment, right? And that's where people start to get frustrated and they stop and they give up because they think that they failed themselves and they haven't done what they wanted to do, versus it's okay to have that vision. Like I said, you know what? I saw these TikTokers, they had, they hit 100K. Like that would be great. Like that would be kind of my long-term vision, right? But I didn't set myself up to have an exact date or time frame. I'm like, I just know that I want to eventually get there. But then I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to learn as much as possible. And then I'm just going to keep going. And I think it's that attitude of do your best, focus on the excellence, focus on the steps to get there, and the rest will follow.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great. This has been so good. I'm so happy that we finally got to do this call.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been such a fun conversation. I always love to be able to chat about this and meet with others who are in the entrepreneurial space, because it is different, and it's fun and everyone's journey is so different, and we all have such different experiences that it's fun to, be able to talk about what is and isn't working.
And it is, and it's so interesting. Like the more I do this, it's like you really see like everyone really has their unique thing, like that they're really like, you excel in teaching and or doing, things in your business that I probably don't do really well, you know what I mean? And just have a whole different approach. And you learn so much from other people doing similar things as you. And so I don't know. I mean, there's people that are more closed-minded and they look at, it's like as a negative, but in my opinion, it's such a positive. I feel like some of the biggest growth I've ever made as an entrepreneur is like learning from my peers, doing the thing or whatever. So just thank you so much, Mandy. This has been awesome.
Thanks so much.
We'll have you on again. And guys, make sure I'll link her YouTube channel below. Yeah, make sure you go subscribe to her channel and watch her trainings, because they're very, very good and they make you feel very sane. You put things up so make it very realistic. And I really like that. So thank you so much, Mandy. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Hannah.